Well, and I noticed a typo in this. He says, and it's spelled Pubnlic.
Pubnalic.
Pubnlic. It sounds like a really bad gentleman's club, doesn't it?
Pubnalic. We're going to go down to the Pubnalic.
Bringing you law, gospel, and guns. This is Armed Lutheran Radio.
Hi, folks. Welcome to Armed Lutheran Radio, a show about guns, hunting, competitive shooting, the natural right of self-defense, and what God's Word says about the issues surrounding gun rights and gun ownership. I'm your host, Lloyd Bailey, the Armed Lutheran, and this is episode number 182. And joining me again is our good friend, John Bennett, the pastor at St. John's Lutheran Church in Willow Creek, Minnesota. Pastor, welcome back.
Thank you, Lloyd. I've had my whiskey. My mind is well lubricated and ready to go.
Well, good. Awesome. Well, we're going old school again this week. We're for the first 3 years of Armed Lutheran Radio, we spent a lot of time debunking articles about gun control, but they got kind of stale after the Las Vegas shooting, and they stopped when the authors and the pastors stopped making any kind of theological arguments at all, and they all started to sound the same. Well, today we've found something from our old go-to, patheos.com, a blog post written in the wake of the El Paso shooting, and we're going to dig into that in just a moment. But first, I want to remind you that Armed Lutheran Radio is listener-funded, and that means that we rely on your support to bring you this show every week. And thanks to the generosity of our supporters, especially members of the Reformation Gun Club, who send us $1, $2, $5 a month, and they get exclusive content and some cool Armed Lutheran swag, and you get the satisfaction of knowing you helped to make this possible. Thank you to our Gun Club members, and if you would like to join them, you can find out more and join today at armedlutheran.us/gun club. All right, we're looking at a blog post from, get this, the Transparent Expedition blog at patheos.com. It's by, and if you wonder what that means, you'll find out in just a moment. Pat Green is the author. He describes himself as a former minister who left the ministry and entered secular life around the time his son came out as transgender. Thus, Transparent Expedition. Get it?
Nice play on words.
Yes.
So clever.
I know. So today he is a photographer, a writer, and a storyteller trying to navigate his way through this new existence. And he's written a post. This was written immediately following El Paso, so he didn't even have all of the latest information on it. He just, wrote this in the immediate aftermath with absolutely. So he gets some details wrong, as you might expect. This is in the aftermath of the El Paso mass shooting recently. It's called Bipartisan Thoughts and Prayers Fail El Paso as 20 Die in a Mass Shooting. And it starts out something like this. There was another mass shooting on August 3rd, 2019. Texas Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick offered his thoughts and prayers. Minutes after that, Reverend Al Sharpton offered thoughts and prayers, adding that prayers without works is meaningless. This act of violence, the gun control debate, thoughts and prayers are also meaningless. Thoughts and prayers to God have been the American way in the wake of these tragedies for years now. To date, God seems to have done nothing to address the issue. Why? Is this part of God's will and loving plan? You can hear the sarcasm dripping from the rest of this paragraph. Was God killed in one of these mass shootings while on another Skee-Ball excursion? You're going to have to explain that one to me here in a minute. God could have taken human form and on his way to play Skee-Ball could have decided to go to a music festival, see a movie, or shop at Walmart. What? What is that?
Okay. So that's... I'm sorry, this is just too dang goofy. That Skee-Ball reference comes from a film in the late 90s. It was from View Askew Productions, which is if you've heard of the Jay and Silent Bob movies, called Dogma, and of course it's a thoroughly blasphemous yet thoroughly hilarious film. And in this movie, one of the premise of the movies is that God has a penchant for Skee-Ball, and so he comes down from heaven every once in a while and inhabits the body of a random person. In the case of the movie, it's a homeless man who goes to Atlantic City to play Skee-Ball, and gets beat up by a bunch of kids and left for dead on life support in a hospital. And so God is like taken out of the picture for the entirety of the movie because, God's trapped in the body of this beat up homeless man. So there we have it, taking theology from a purely fictional and thoroughly blasphemous movie.
Right, and this guy's a former minister.
Minister of what?
I'm not sure.
My goodness. Maybe he was slated for that Minister of Gun Control spot, but was overlooked because his son was trans. Who knows?
Who knows? He definitely majored in sarcasm. He later
but I think he got a D- in it.
He later criticizes evangelical Christians for their opposition to gun control, but he seems to think God should be involved directly in the policy decisions of a nation. And I'm pretty sure that God doesn't care whether you support gun control or not.
Well, and based on my reading of the scriptures, if God was directly involved in public policy within this country, his son might be in some hot water based on what I read in the Old Testament.
I'm pretty sure he cares. He cares about how we treat our neighbors. He makes that very clear. So if you own a gun and you use it to do bad things, like shoot people at Walmart in El Paso, he's pretty much not cool with that. But if you've got one for self-defense or hunting or competition, I'm pretty sure he doesn't really care about that.
Yes.
At all. It's what's in your heart. All right, so back to this guy's a little more sarcasm here.
You can blame me for this one since I dug it up.
In the middle of all this, I did see Karen on social media praise God that she found a parking space. Is it possible that God was busy taking care of Karen's needs to make it to Zumba on time? Being her personal GPS and ensuring her good parking in Jersey may have been distracting. And then he says, I reached out to an atheist for comment, and he told me the likely reason God does not respond to the thoughts and prayers is due to the non-existence of God. Regardless, thoughts and prayers seem to be ineffective. And that's about as much, if you want to call it this, theology as you're going to get in this post.
Yeah. Well, and here's the thing, that ultimately when it comes down to it, these people are so foolish in their thinking that laws will somehow stop evil in this world. I'm sorry to break it to them, but evil will not cease to be until Christ returns and the last judgment has taken place.
Well, he's next going to suggest that the problem is Texas, and Texas is lax gun laws, so-called, and he gets a lot of facts really wrong. The events at the El Paso Walmart marks the 16th mass shooting in the state of Texas. This is a state that is a gun rights advocate's answer to prayers. No ammo restrictions on magazines, no license required for open carry of rifles, no background check for private purchase, and stand your ground laws are in place. Now, but if you look at what those shootings are, one was an armed robbery. One was a guy who shot at police who served him a subpoena for being late on his rent, kind of like the Philadelphia guy this previous week, who police came to serve a warrant and he shot at them, and that's counted as a mass shooting. 4 were familicides. Now that's where some guy decides, I'm going to kill my family and then myself.
Right.
One that they count is that shootout. You remember the shootout between the biker gangs?
I do not.
There was a huge shootout at a like a Hooters. I don't think it's Hooters. I think it's called Twin Peaks. And
Twin Peaks. I've never heard of it, but it sounds hilarious.
it's basically a restaurant. And 2 biker gangs showed up at the same restaurant. Words were exchanged, and a gunfight broke out between 2 biker gangs, and that was counted as a mass shooting. 2 of them were by soldiers at Fort Hood. One was a radical Muslim, the other one had PTSD and just snapped. So that leaves only 6 true mass shootings, the kind that happened like the shooting in El Paso where some rando shooting, he goes and decides he's going to kill a bunch of people. Everything else was, targeted crime. And 3 of those 6 happened before concealed carry was legal in Texas.
But concealed carry is the problem.
Concealed carry is the problem. 1966 was the first one. University of Texas tower shooting. And he fails to mention that in that incident, the shooter was stopped in large part because of students who went to their cars, got their hunting rifles, and shot back and pinned him down so that police could get up to him. So this list is a complete joke.
Much like the lists that say there's been over 200 mass shootings this year.
Yes, 1 a day or whatever it is. Yeah, exactly.
Now, I just wanted to clarify for our audience that we are in no way trying to make light of those who are killed in these cases, but they take these as an example of why guns are the problem rather than human behavior.
Yes. And you mentioned our hangout earlier tonight. One of the things that we were discussing was this idea of statistics, and this is a way that the left likes to pad the numbers to try to mislead people into thinking that the sky is falling, right? Oh my goodness, we've got 40,000 people being killed by guns. Oh my goodness, there's a mass shooting every day. No, there's not.
If you create some just random criteria for a statistic, it doesn't necessarily mean that statistic is authoritative.
So if the metric is 4 or more people injured or killed, then that allows you to basically paint all kinds of crime as mass shootings.
Yes. And therein lies the problem.
Yes. If we can't agree on what those metrics are, if we can't get to a place where we are talking about the same statistics, it's going to be really hard for us to debate these issues and actually make any headway.
And the one thing that those who are proponents of these gun control measures never talk about is the element of intent when counting these mass shooting events. Mm-hmm. That they create this statistic, this, random 4 or more people injured, but they never ever talk about intent. So often what we see with the true mass shooting events is that it's all about intent.
Right.
And yet they refuse to measure that element within these shootings.
It's sort of like, the way the Brady campaign, or was it Brady or is it Moms Demand Action that always counted the school shooting statistics. So if you had if you had a group of gang members, and a drug deal gone wrong in a school parking lot at 11 o'clock at night, that counted as a school shooting.
Right. Yeah, I don't think that's how it works.
Not quite. Back to our author. There should be good guys with a gun on every corner with no possibility for a bad guy with a gun to get away with anything. But the reality was, well-meaning, ill-prepared, and ill-trained good guys with guns in a mall will not know who a bad guy in the mall is.
It's as if he is branding gun owners as those who randomly go shooting willy-nilly as soon as trouble arises.
Right. Well, and he brings up a guy at the El Paso incident who has been hailed as a hero, but his tactics weren't great.
Yes.
And we'll get to that in a moment. But he's also fallen for this myth that because Texas has such lax gun laws, supposedly, that everybody and their brother carries a gun. But the truth is that only about 5% of Texans have permits to carry. So I would agree with him. There should have been a guy on every corner, but there's not. It's kind of like with the NRA. Why is the NRA only got 5% of all gun owners as members? Why are there only 5% of Texans with carry permits? It just doesn't make any sense.
Well, and it shows his ignorance that if I was going to address statistics in this way, I would be looking at those states that have constitutional carry instead.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you have, for example, Arizona, where anybody who is a law-abiding citizen who could lawfully own a firearm can open carry.
Well, that's because there hasn't been a mass shooting in Arizona.
Oh, darn. I guess we can't use that as a statistic now, can we?
Right. It's only 5% in Texas. There's this crazy misunderstanding, this myth that Texas is just everybody and their brother walking around with a gun on their hip, and it's just not true.
They forget that the city of Austin exists, don't they?
Yes, exactly. There were off-duty police, armed military, and self-professed good guys with guns in the mall, and none of them apprehended the suspect. Well, it didn't happen in the mall. It happened in the Walmart, but never mind that. One man, Glendon Oakley, was assisting children leaving the mall with his gun in hand. He had to explain to police that he was a good guy with a gun as he headed out in the presence of children in an active shooter situation. And this is the guy we mentioned a moment ago. He's been hailed as a hero, but the author here is correct. He should not have just, as soon as he heard the shooting, he should not have drawn his gun unless he had, an idea where the threat was, unless he had identified the threat and was prepared to engage it. He shouldn't have been walking around with the gun. But nevertheless, the fact that he had one and the fact that he didn't stop the shooter is irrelevant.
Right, because he wasn't within the vicinity of the shooting itself.
Right.
He was. If you look at the aerial view of this location, he was several hundred yards away from where the shooting was actually taking place.
Yep. How many people you think were probably in that Walmart at the time?
I would say maybe 75 to 150.
Okay, so if the percentages hold, and we only have 5% of Texans who have carry permits, how many permitted concealed carriers you think were actually in that store? Probably only that one guy.
Right.
I don't know why he thinks that everybody and their brother should have just opened up on this guy, and it should never have happened.
You cannot use the absence of something to prove a thing. Because something didn't happen doesn't mean the reverse is suddenly true.
Right.
And it seems like that's what he's trying to do. Because there weren't any quote-unquote good guys with the gun who responded by shooting the guy, he automatically assumes that it's not necessary to have people with concealed carry.
Right.
That seems to be where he's going with that.
Yes, and and his next paragraph, he's trying to make the point that, well, if you have people with concealed carry permits, then nobody will know who the bad guy is, and the police won't know who the bad guy is, as if it makes any difference, because in the end, there were no concealed carry permit holders there, and the guy killed 20 people.
Which kind of says to me that maybe if they had had somebody there with a concealed carry permit and was lawfully armed, that things might have turned out differently. Call me crazy.
Exactly. 20 people died, he says, at the hands of a bad guy with a gun, and the only way he was stopped was by trained police officers. They got him into custody without firing a single round. Only after 20 people had been killed, by the way.
Because well, I don't know if you have to bleep this out. I'll clean up my language a little bit. Because the D-bag surrendered.
Yes.
Even
exactly
though
right.
in his racist screed that he published, that he said that he would not.
Mm-hmm.
That he would not surrender.
Yep.
It just shows how much of a coward this guy really was.
In the end, they're all cowards.
Yes.
Every last one of them. Speaking of which, and here he goes again, none of the good guys with guns fired a single round in El Paso. Thoughts and prayers did not reduce the death count either. Open carry forced the police in more than one instance in Texas, and I don't know where he gets this claim, to view every person with a gun as a suspect and an imminent threat in a situation like this until proved otherwise. That, in theory, is true, because if police roll up to a shooting and you've got a gun out, they're going to assume that you are potentially a threat. But again, it's irrelevant, because there weren't any other open carriers at this event.
Right.
And, to be honest, open carry, you know how I feel about it, I know how you feel about it. Open carry in Texas has basically caused more people, more businesses to post anti-gun or no-gun signs, what we call our 30-06 and 30-07 signs, to prevent not only open carry, but concealed carry. Before open carry passed in Texas, nobody really cared. It was sort of out of thought, out of sight, out of mind, right?
But it was these derps walking around with their AR-15s that caused everybody to get uncomfortable.
Yes, and as soon as they passed open carry, they came up with this 30-07 sign, which basically 30-06 and 30-07 are the state statutes that say, and you post these signs at your business, and they have to be a certain size and certain font and all this stuff. And basically, the 30-06 said allows you to deny entry by someone who is concealed carrying. When the open carry law passed, 30-07 signs were created because the 30-07 was the statute under which open carry was allowed. And so if you wanted to prevent open carry, you had to put up the 30-07 sign. Businesses, while they were putting up the 30-07 signs because they didn't want those yahoos with the rifles coming into their stores, just said, while we're at it, we'll go ahead and put up the 30-06 as well. And so,
right.
And I have yet to see a single person open carrying in Texas. Not even one. But I've seen more 30-06 signs.
That's what happens when you're stuck with well-meaning derps in your state.
Yes, exactly right. From all accounts, our author says, this is a beautiful community, speaking of El Paso, that has lost loved ones because of someone who was radicalized. Not radicalized by Muslims, radicalized by white nationals who love Trump, AR-15s, racism, and thoughts and prayers. Radicalized by thoughts and prayers?
That makes absolutely no sense whatsoever.
Mike Royko, he continues, was a columnist who wrote for the Chicago Daily News, the Chicago Sun-Times, and the Chicago Tribune in a career that spanned 3 decades. He was my inspiration for wanting to be a journalist and a columnist. Every day in high school, I would turn to page 3 of the Chicago Tribune to see what Royko had to say about the news before the first bell. When I was a senior in high school, there was a school shooting in another Chicago suburb near where I lived. A woman entered a public school in Winnetka, Illinois on May 20th, 1988. She opened fire on a classroom, and she killed 1 second grader and injured 5 others. Now, before we go to the next paragraph, it's interesting that he would point out that in a city that has always had exceptionally restrictive gun control, years before McDonald v. Chicago and years before Heller, you had a mass shooting in Chicago.
Yes, and this, our intrepid author doesn't realize how much he contradicts all his own arguments with that one paragraph.
I'd read many articles from Mike Royko where he eviscerated the NRA and problematic gun laws. I could not wait to read what he had to say about this particular shooting. My hero was going to wake up the city and the nation. Mike Royko was asked to write about the matter, and on May 26th, I felt my heart sink as he wrote about why he was not writing about it. This was my first awakening that some battles cannot be won, even by your heroes. Royko basically said that in 25 years of battling gun laws in his columns, he had given up. There was a cycle. Public outrage. Lawmakers would try to invoke old gun control bills. This is where it gets interesting, because he basically explains why this never works, and it never works because we're always focusing on the gun, but then he says we got to focus on the gun.
Right.
There's a cycle. Public outrage. Lawmakers try to invoke old gun control bills to get them passed. The NRA and the GOP put an end to that swiftly. We wait for the next preventable tragedy. Does any of this sound familiar? The only thing that is different is we now have 24-hour news cycles and the thoughts and prayers to a God, lowercase g, who is silent on the issue.
Because he's playing Skee-Ball.
Yes.
This guy isn't just a tool, he's a super tool, or stool for short.
The old S-tool.
Oh, man.
Well, maybe instead of, as he says, putting forward the same old gun laws over and over and over again, instead of battling for more and more restrictive gun control that only hurt good people, maybe Mike Royko should have battled corruption in City Hall and fought to keep criminals off the streets. Maybe that would have worked better.
The incredible irony is that he acknowledges that gun control laws have not helped, and yet he's asking for more gun control laws.
Exactly. And we move on. I'm just going to skip down to this last couple of paragraphs, because he makes that point so well, and yet never notices how he contradicts himself. In Chicago, with tight gun restrictions, it happens. In Texas, with virtually no gun control laws, it happens. He doesn't know anything about Texas. We got plenty of gun control laws here. The NRA and the GOP will continue to march forward into madness, and nothing will change. No amount of public outcry, legislation attempts, or thoughts and prayers will end this. Didn't he just admit that these happen no matter what kind of gun control laws you have? But in the very next sentence, he says we need to vote to change it.
Yes. Well, and I noticed a typo in this. He says, and it's spelled Pubnlic.
Pubnlic.
Pubnlic. It sounds like a really bad gentleman's club, doesn't it?
Pubnlic. We're going to go down to the Pubnlic.
I'm sorry. I just couldn't overlook that.
If we don't find something to laugh about in this, we'll have to cry. So no Pubnlic outcry, and no matter what kind of legislation, no matter what kind of prayers or thoughts and prayers we send, will end this. But we need to vote for new laws to end this.
Yes.
But then he says he's going to support those who want to stop this madness, which I assume he means are people that want to pass more laws, which he already said don't work. But I'm done writing about it. I am done speaking about it in social media. The NRA, the GOP, and evangelical Christians have replaced the value of life for a gun. The same group that claims to be pro-life cannot be bothered to fix this. Instead, they kill bills and prohibit research into the matter. They offer thoughts and prayers as opposed to change.
And there's that old lie that the GOP is blocking the CDC from researching gun control.
Right. Prayer and legislation and gun laws won't stop this, but we need to vote for people who want more laws to stop this.
And it all comes back to that crazy idea that we can somehow, with the right laws, stop evil people from doing evil things.
It's sort of like the argument that when people say they're in favor of communism, and you say, well, communism never works, and their answer is, well, the right people haven't tried it.
Right.
Final thoughts on this guy's stuff. I mean, he writes a final paragraph or couple of paragraphs of apologizing for his sarcasm, but then goes on to explain why his sarcasm is valid, and to suggest that other countries have passed gun control in the UK and Japan and Australia and Germany, and why we can't do the same thing doesn't make sense to him. Thoughts on this idea that thoughts and prayers, because we keep saying thoughts and prayers and nothing changes, that God doesn't care about this issue, and that we just need to vote for the right people to make change.
Well, and to address that from a slightly different angle, that the same people who are saying that thoughts and prayers don't work are the same people who are saying that we need to do something, quote unquote. Mm-hmm. The reality of it is that there is sin in this world. There is evil in this world. You cannot, quote unquote, do something to stop evil in a universal sense. There has already been something that was done, that was Christ upon the cross almost 2,000 years ago. That is where our focus is as we live in a world that is inundated with evil. But to live with the silly notion that if you just have the right laws and the right people elected to public office, that somehow these evil, what's the word I'm looking for? That these evil incidents will somehow cease to exist, that is just complete juvenile idiocy. How can you be so naive to think that you can legislate evil away? It cannot and will not happen. As I said earlier, evil will not cease to be until Christ returns and the final judgment has taken place. But in the meantime, there are things that we can do. We can address the significant number of firearm homicides that take place within the gang communities. And this is something, and I'm not trying to beat a dead horse here, but this is the one area where our politicians, our legislators, could actually do something to reduce the number of people that fall victim because some terrible, wicked person does something terribly wicked with a firearm.
Yep.
But they have not, and it doesn't seem as if they are intent on ever addressing those issues.
No, exactly right. And the idea is generally put forward that if we oppose gun control, that we must not want to do anything.
Right.
And we can't. And there was a post on social media I saw from Rob Pincus this week talking about we need to make better arguments. And I agree. We can't just throw slogans out and talk about, my rights and the Constitution and shall not be infringed. That can't be the answer. I mean, that's true. Those things are true, but you can't just say those things and expect to change hearts and minds. We've got to make it clear that yes, we want to see these things stop too. We want to see these mass killings and these gang killings, and we want to see the number of firearms deaths decrease. But we just have a different idea about how to do it.
Yes, and I think what we need to start doing as the pro-Second Amendment community is saying, no, we oppose these things because we know that they will not work. Here's why we do not believe that these will work. Here is what we believe will work. Let's start working towards that goal instead of pursuing these ideas that we can see for certain will not be effective. Again, the city of Chicago is a standing example of how gun control laws have been ineffective. But instead of just simply saying that, we need to say why we believe that these will not work, and here's what we believe will be, to some extent, effective and successful in curtailing some of this violence.
Yep.
But sadly, right now, it seems that too many of our quote-unquote conservative politicians are more intent upon appeasing the masses than actually making some common sense arguments.
Yeah. Yep. They would rather do something and maybe make minimize the impact, like background checks, or they won't go so far as gun bans, but we'll do background checks, or we'll do red flag laws so it looks like that we're trying to do it. We care about this issue and that we want to do something. When what they, like you said, what they should be doing is making a proper argument for why the things that people are arguing for don't work. And here are some ideas that will.
And sadly, they seem to be more intent on pursuing mass appeal than solutions.
Yep. And the problem is that they want to be able to say they did something, so that when it's time to run for re-election, they can't be attacked for doing nothing. All right, I think that kind of wraps it up. I think we've tied a bow around that one nicely. Thank you, Pastor. I appreciate you sticking around late for this one.
Well, it was fun, so you're very welcome.
Next week is another of our variety shows with tips from Mia and Sergeant Bill, and another pontification from the pastor. If you have any questions or any comments about anything you heard here tonight, any complaints, visit our feedback page at armedlutheran.us/feedback. Leave us a voicemail or a voice message. We mentioned our hangout that we had tonight. If you would like to take part in those events, Join the Reformation Gun Club at armedlutheran.us/gun club. Our next one is coming up the 19th of September. We hope you will join us for that. Until next week, when we visit with you again, keep shooting, keep praying. We'll talk to you next time.
John Bennett is the pastor at St. John's Lutheran Church in Willow Creek, Minnesota. For more information, visit stjohnswillowcreek.org. For show notes, be sure to visit our website at www.armedlutheran.us. Check out the Facebook page, The Armed Lutheran, or join our Facebook group, Fans of Armed Lutheran Radio. If you like what you hear, please leave us a comment on our feedback page at armedlutheran.us/feedback or a review on iTunes and let us know what you think. Thank you for listening to Armed Lutheran Radio, a member of the Self-Defense Radio Network.